Hello. In this study, we're going to look at one of the most, well, absolutely the most pervasive attacks on the Christian faith and the Bible it rests upon. And the title is Spiritists, Occultists, and Esotericists. Oh my, because this is all the fount of, or foundation of, all other false teachings. And they take different forms, of course, but as I said in the description, and I'll just read that, much of what people think is new and better spirituality is neither new nor better. And I have a quote from Ecclesiastes 1:9 that basically says, what's happening now will be done again. It's been done before. There's nothing new on the earth. The purpose of this study is to reinforce the necessity of God's Word as the anchor of truth and light that exposes all the falsehoods, and to expose all other spiritualist philosophies as having one thing in common: hatred of that true light by the false light. And as it says in 2 Corinthians 11:13-15, there are people who are fake apostles, fraudulent workers, who try to pass themselves off as apostles of Christ. And this should come as no surprise, because Satan presents himself as an angel of light, and that's the key. So it is to be expected that his servants also present themselves as servants of righteousness, but in the end they'll get what they deserve. And I'm going to start out by reading from Colossians, the second chapter, and I'm going to start around, I'm going to say verse 4, and it says, "Now I'm saying all this so that no one scams you with smooth talk." And then he talks about how they're aligned with the truth. And then in verse 8 he says, "So beware that no one loots you by means of the philosophy and hollow delusion that come from human tradition. These are aligned with the elements of the world and not with Christ. The entirety of the divine nature is embodied in him," that's Christ, "and you have been made complete in him, who is the source of every rule and authority." And then he goes on to say in Colossians that you were buried with him and you live with him. And then it says in verse 16, "Do not let anyone judge you about food and drink, or about observing festivals or new moons or Sabbaths. Those are all shadows of what is to come. As the body of Christ, let no one pass judgment on you." They're always going on about their humility and seeing angels in their rituals, legends in their own carnal minds. They've lost connection with the head, out of whom the entire body grows from God, who supplies the ligaments and connects it all together. And this seeing angels is going to be at the heart and root and center of all the falsehoods we're going to look at today. Verse 20, "So if, along with Christ, the elements of the world are now dead to you, why, as though you still live in the world, do you subject yourself to its rules? You should stay away from this, stop tasting that, don't touch those. All of those things will decay and be used up, since they're merely human edicts and instructions. They do seem on the surface to be pious acts of wisdom and humility with their physical deprivations, but they're of no value for satisfying cravings. They don't actually make you a better person." Now I want to look at this article on occultism from Britannica. Take that as you will as a source, but I do try to avoid Wiki when possible. Sometimes, I mean, not everything on Wiki is bad, quote unquote, but on spirituality, I think it is very biased, and I think pretty much any non-Christian source is going to be biased against Christianity. But the definition here in Britannica is: occultism is various theories and practices involving a belief in and knowledge of or use of supernatural forces or beings. Such beliefs and practices, principally magical or divinatory, have occurred in all human societies throughout recorded history, with considerable variations in both their nature and the attitude of societies toward them. In the West, the term occultism has acquired intellectually and morally pejorative overtones that do not attain in other societies where the practices and beliefs concerned do not run counter to the prevailing worldview. In other words, in the West, where Christianity had been most prevalent, you have opposition to occultism for natural reasons. I mean, the Bible is against everything else because everything else is false. But in places where falsehood has reigned and Christianity has not, you won't find this disagreement and this opposition, and that just seems self-evident. But they don't give the reason here in the Britannica, of course, that Christianity's influence in the Western world has been heaviest, and that's where the opposition and negativity of the term occultism comes from. They go on here, occult practices center on the presumed ability of the practitioner to manipulate natural laws for personal benefit or on behalf of another. Such practices tend to be regarded as evil only when they're also involved in breaking moral laws, while the very fact that they're against God and dipping into things the Bible says not to dip into makes them immoral. So whether the moral laws are based in the Bible now is a question, and of course every place where Christianity is not prevalent, which is pretty much the world now, they don't consider these things immoral. They go on, some anthropologists have argued that it's not possible to make a clear-cut distinction between magic, a principal component of occultism, and religion. And this may well be true of the religious systems of some non-literate societies. The argument does not hold, however, for any of the major religions which regard both natural and moral law as immutable. That is to say, you can't change it, it is what it is, and it's set in stone because it comes from God. The Western tradition of occultism, as popularly conceived, is of an ancient secret philosophy, lots of things can fit in there, underlying all occult practices. This secret philosophy derives ultimately from Hellenistic magic. Hellenistic means Greek, and alchemy. So the Greeks are a fountainhead of what is, in modern terms, considered occultism. And this on one hand, and then from Jewish mysticism on the other. So we have Greek magic and alchemy, Jewish mysticism, or Talmudism for all intents and purposes. The principal Hellenistic source is the Corpus Hermeticum, the text associated with Hermes, which are concerned with astrology and other occult sciences with spiritual regeneration, with spiritual regeneration. So when people say astrology isn't anti-Christian, they don't know what they're talking about. The Jewish element is supplied by the Kabbalah, the doctrine of a secret mystical interpretation of the Torah, and very much against God. And you can see the chart on the right. It's blurry even on the original web page, so I suppose you can click on that and see more detail. But the point is here, I'm going on, which had been familiar to scholars in Europe since the Middle Ages, and which was linked to the Hermetic text during the Renaissance. So they blended together in the Renaissance the Jewish and Greek mythologies and mysticisms. The resulting Hermetic Kabbalistic tradition, known as Hermetism, incorporated both theory and magical practice, with the latter presented as natural and thus good magic, in contrast to the evil magic of sorcery or witchcraft. As far as the Bible's concerned, which is the only concern that matters, there is no such thing as white magic or good magic. Magic is against God, ergo it is evil, even if it has what seem to be beneficial purposes or results, because we know, as we read in the scriptures, Satan masquerades as an angel of light, and his ministers present themselves as ministers of righteousness, or servants. Minister is just a synonym for a servant. So you can see that these were two separate things and they blended together. And alchemy, it says, was also absorbed into the body of Hermetism, and this link was strengthened in the early 17th century, the 1600s. That's when a certain Bible translation was made, with the appearance of Rosicrucianism, an alleged secret brotherhood that utilized alchemical symbolism and taught secret wisdom to its followers, creating a spiritual alchemy that survived the rise of empirical science and enabled Hermeticism, or I've always heard it that way, I keep pronouncing it that way, Hermetism in this article, to pass unscathed into the period of the Enlightenment. So there's a lot of blending going on, and the roots of empirical science are in this alchemical mix, or soup. But supposedly they say they've ditched the supernatural, but I'm not, as the farther science so-called goes, especially when it gets into theoretical physics, the closer it gets back to its Kabbalistic Hermetic roots. During the 18th century, that's the 1700s, the tradition was taken up by esoterically inclined, that means hidden, Freemasons, who could not find an occult philosophy within Freemasonry. They wanted to put one in, so that's how it blended with that. These enthusiasts persisted both as individual students of Hermetism and in continental Europe as groups of occult practitioners into the 19th century. That's the 1800s, the general time when my grandparents were born, when the growth of religious skepticism led to an increased rejection of Orthodox religion by the educated and a consequent search for salvation by other means, including occultism. So, when you have academics, which come from, I think, if memory serves, originally from more formal situations that the Greeks had, such as their gymnasiums, which wouldn't be pronounced that way, but that's the word we know, which were basically kind of like universities, and they did not have this clean separation between the natural and the supernatural. And so the Freemasons wanted to bring back that blend. And then going on here, those interested turned to new forms of occultism rather than to the Hermetic tradition. On the one hand, to spiritualism, the practice of alleged regular communication between the living and the spirits of the dead, which the Bible expressly forbids, through a living medium, and we're going to meet some of those mediums here in a bit. And on the other hand, to Theosophy. Remember Helena Blavatsky, we'll look at her in a little bit. A blend of Western occultism and Eastern mysticism that proved to be a most effective propagator of occultism, but whose influence had declined markedly by the late 20th century. This has made a comeback, especially online, especially in quote-unquote conspiracy realms. And then they go on here, indeed, despite the 19th century revival, occult ideas have failed to gain acceptance in academic circles, although they have occasionally influenced the work of major artists, such as the poet Yeats, and the painter Kandinsky, and occultism in Europe and North America seems destined to remain the province of popular culture. But again, this has crept in, and not by accident, to theoretical quote-unquote science. They're very much coming together. There's an old saying that I forget who said it in the exact words, but basically they said that these scientists are like as though they're climbing this great mountain of knowledge only to reach the summit and find a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. We're just about there. I'm pretty sure we're, in all practical terms, there. Because, as we've seen in recent years, there is a growing opposition to anything related to reason and logic and fairness and justice and anything considered a given in the past. Then we have a definition here for magician. One who practices magic, sometimes considered the same as a sorcerer or witch. Conjurers are also sometimes called magicians, reflecting a historical confusion whereby legerdemain was considered to involve the supernatural. The name derives from the magus, an ancient Persian priest, and the cognate of magdim, a Chaldean term meaning wisdom and philosophy. So wisdom, philosophy, and science are all intertwined. And though there was a brief time here in the Western world to separate empirical science out, that isn't going to last. It is fading away. And then you can read about the Philosopher's Stone, which is an alchemy term about poltergeists and all sorts of occult things here. But now we need to move on in the interest of time to specific examples. But I want to look at the definition of theosophy. We saw that term a little bit earlier, and this is from the Theosophical Society, so not something from Wiki or whatever. And they start off, and you can't help but notice as you read these things, as you would read any other religious views website to the public, they all sound about the same. They all sound very nice. They all want the same things. But as the saying goes, the devil's in the details, sometimes quite literally. And they talk about here in this ancient wisdom and one version of the ancient wisdom. So they're saying that all the religions and philosophies are the same thing with different manifestations, if you will. And they're going to tell you about a particular one. Okay? So this isn't something new and isn't something different. It's just their emphasis. They say one version of this ancient wisdom in recent times is Theosophy, derived from Greek roots, meaning divine wisdom. It is a body of knowledge that tells us about our place in the universe and why the world is the way it is. These are very basic questions that even atheists have asked in recent generations, and Theosophy, like everybody else, is going to try to tell you what the answers are to these questions or how to achieve them, or to put a carrot on a stick in front of you that you will chase forever and never reach. And they go on, although it agrees in many respects with scientific theories, it goes past them in addressing unseen realities. That's the supernatural, or, if you will, dark matter. Can't see it, can't detect it, but mathematically it must be there, therefore we believe in it. That's so-called science today. That we all experience, unseen realities that we all experience. We don't, of course, experience dark matter, but often don't understand, and answers many questions people have. Why am I here? What's the purpose of the universe? Is there a God? Why is there evil? How can I have meaning in my life? Again, these are all very generic things. The Theosophical Society in America has a vision of wholeness that inspires a fellowship united in study, meditation, and service, generic terms, has a mission of encouraging open-minded inquiry, and I've found that open-mindedness is a kind of a euphemism for ditch the things that are etched in stone and come with me to find something that isn't. Anyway, open-minded inquiry into world religions, philosophy, science, and the arts in order to understand the wisdom of the ages, respect the unity of all life, and help people explore spiritual self-transformation. These sound like things you could get from there's a thing called the BS generator, the New Age BS generator, and similar things. And I found a place where you could download the code, but don't ask me for the link. I don't still have that. This is just strung together statements that sound spirity. And their last point here has an ethic, based on what? Holding that our every action, feeling, and thought affect all other beings, and that each of us is capable of and responsible for contributing to the benefit of the whole. Outside of yourself, each individual has their opinions on what's good and bad. Morality isn't universal unless it's outside of us, unless it's unchanging, unless it comes from someone who is beyond us, which is not another human being who claims to be ascended, but God who demonstrated that in Jesus coming from being born of a virgin, living a sinless life, laying down his life and taking it up again. So that's eyewitness testimony, whereas we have nothing of the sort for Theosophy or anything else. Anyway, you can go on and read here. All these links are in the description of the video. Founded in 1875, the Theosophical Society has stood for freedom of thought, and respect for all people, except Christians, regardless of race, class, caste, sex, or religion, they say, but that's not how it's practiced. To join the Theosophical Society, you're required to have no specific beliefs. You only need to state your agreement with these three objects, form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood of humanity, to encourage the comparative study of religion and philosophy and science, and to investigate unexplained laws of nature and powers latent in humanity. So they're enticing you with some kind of power and esoteric knowledge that only you will have because you will follow these three objects. And they'll let you in if you'll do that. The members can follow any school of thought. What's the point of being a member? But have no right to force their choice on others. This is where you get the ridiculous phrase people say today that it's arrogant to say that you've found truth, because that means somebody else has not, and that's bad. But in stating that, you're stating something you believe to be true. It's self-contradictory, like the statement, nothing is knowable. That's a knowledge claim. Anyway, they say they're encouraging freedom of thought and expression within the limits of courtesy and consideration, which would be violated if you identified as a Christian, because there are things you don't tolerate in others. Most Theosophists regard truth as a prize to be striven for, not as a dogma to be imposed by authority. Again, what happens when you find it? If you're striving for something, there must be a reason, a goal, something to reach, and when you reach it, what happens? They say, we hold that belief should be the result of individual understanding rather than mere acceptance of traditional ideas. Well, everything that's traditional is not made up or just social. Some traditions, many traditions are, but some are traditions because they're universally and eternally true. They're resting everything on knowledge and experience, which is personal, which is solipsism, the same thing that Mandela effect is. It's solipsism, where the only thing that's true is what's true for you. Not on faith. There's a direct confrontation with the Christian faith. The Christian faith. The Bible speaks in Hebrews 11 of faith being the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. But to the Theosophists, say that 5 times fast, it's all about your knowledge and your experience, and no one can tell you otherwise. So I guess you could say that modern manifestations of Theosophy would also include the Mandela effect, the way it is defined by most of its followers, whereas the originators of the term held to it more as a phenomenon of bad memory, collectively, than of memory being infallible. Anyway, going on here, at the same time, Theosophists respect the beliefs of different traditions. How is that possible to respect them at the same time demanding that they respect everybody else's? If you have a belief, it's not compromisable. They say, we see each religion as an expression of the divine wisdom adapted to the needs of a particular time and place. That is to say, true for you, true for maybe your people in your time. So you can walk away from the Bible. That was for the people of Israel back then in the 1st century at the latest, and the Christians. That's we've moved past that. That's the Theosophical way. They say we prefer to study various religions rather than condemning them. That's impossible. If you're going to study them, you have to condemn them because they each make exclusive claims, which you're against as a Theosophist. They call this tolerance, even to the intolerant, not as a privilege we bestow, but as a duty we perform. I don't care why you do this. It's self-contradictory. We seek to remove ignorance, not punish it. Our aims are peace and truth. But how that comes out in practice is what I've been talking about. It doesn't work. It's self-contradictory. It's a membership organization. It's the one in America is a branch of the World Fellowship, International Theosophical Society, with headquarters in India. All are welcome to use our resources, blah, blah, blah. And then they give a brief history, which starts with Helena Blavatsky. It was founded in late 1875 in New York City by the Russian Helena Petrovna, I think I said that right, Blavatsky, an American attorney, Colonel Henry Steele Olcott, along with another attorney, William Kuan Judge, and a number of other individuals in search of the ancient wisdom. Okay, so we've got a couple of attorneys, a so-called Russian noblewoman, and unnamed others seeking ancient wisdom. Madame Blavatsky was the first Russian woman to be naturalized as an American citizen. She traveled the world looking for wisdom. She eventually brought the wisdom of the East. Somehow that doesn't include Christianity or Judaism because they're Eastern. And that of the ancient Western mysteries to the modern West, where they were virtually unknown. So you can blame her for a lot of this intrusion into the Christian West. Her writings became the first exposition of what is today known as modern Theosophy. Colonel Olcott, the lawyer and journalist, became the first president of the society, veteran of the Civil War, looked into supposedly corruption in the armed services. I mean, I'm not guessing that there wasn't corruption, but supposedly he investigated that. And He investigated the assassination of President Lincoln, an authority in agriculture, just giving some background on him as a person. Now, he and Blavatsky moved to India, where the society spread rapidly. In 1882, they established the international headquarters, where it has remained. They also visited Ceylon, I think that's how you pronounce it, in Sri Lanka. He's Alcott is a national hero there for social welfare and helping out oppressed Buddhists. The guy named William Judge did the American section, 14 branches in 14 cities, rapid growth. So by 1895, which is just after the birth of one of my grandparents, there were 102 American branches with 6,000 members. Anyway, the administrative center is located in Wheaton, Illinois. Today it has members in almost 70 countries around the world. Was influential in the creation of many later esoteric movements. And then again, esoteric means hidden. And this is a very Gnostic term, because if something is hidden and you know the secrets, you are an adept, and you have something on the rest of the common people. And so it strokes your ego while claiming not to do that. But it's all about secret knowledge. It has gone back right to the Garden of Eden, where the serpent said, has God really said, first of all, where people want to doubt the Bible, and then you will be like gods, knowing good and evil. You will have special knowledge that right now God only has. So this is the most ancient of heresies. This is the most ancient attack on spiritual truth. Notable cases, they mentioned some names of Westcott, co-founder of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in the UK. That's a known Theosophist, and I might say also kind of a Freemason. When you study Freemasonry, you'll run into that term. Max Heindel, founder of the Rosicrucian Fellowship in the United States. Alice Bailey, another well-known name, founder of the Arcane School. Rudolf Steiner, we'll look at him also later, founder of the International Anthroposophical Society. The Russian painter Nicholas Roerich and his wife Helena, founders of the Agni Yoga Society. There's yoga. No, it's not harmless. And Guy and Edna Ballard, founders of the I Am movement, among others. Wow. Well, now there's an absolutely blatant attempt to replace the God of the Bible. It's very blasphemous to name yourself the I Am movement. So there's a bunch of them. If you wanted a group photo, I'm sure they are gone on to their quote-unquote reward, but I'm also probably sure, I can't be sure, but I would guess that they're either regretting their decisions or digging in their heels, which may be more the case in these people who are so thoroughly foundational to the spread of much more evil. The worse you are, the less you are sorry about the evil that you've done. Anyway, I think that's enough on that article, and I want to look at another one on Freemasonry. And we have several more to look at with Freemasonry. I have these listed in the description. Masonry, this is from let me highlight this paragraph because I want to go to the top and find the title. Project Canterbury, The Truth About Freemasonry, a sermon preached by invitation of the Naphtali Lodge, that is a Freemason lodge, asking this guy to come and preach a sermon. His name is George R. Vandy Water. And this was 1911. So this is a pro-Mason giving a sermon. Okay? And he says Masonry is not only ancient, there are a good many things that are old that are not true, but Masonry is honorable. He says Mason always been honorable. I beg to differ. If you dig into it and find that even at the lowest level of membership in Freemasonry, you must take a blood oath and agree to this, you will die this particular kind of death if you divulge secrets, that's not honorable. Anyway, he says, at all times we find a record of Masonry prominent in public life, pursuing the knowledge of this craft. If we come down to modern times, that's 1911, we find the greatest kings and emperors of Europe leading the craft, governing their respective grand bodies. Some of the rites of Masonry originated with great emperors and kings. That's also why you will find high-level Mason rituals in Mormonism, for example, by testimony of former Mormons. And I haven't gathered all the links for all the stuff I've read, decades ago. Sorry about that. A lot of the links I would have would be dead by now anyway. But look into it. And he says, down to the present day and for a long time, the King of Great Britain or someone by his appointment of royal blood has been the Grand Master of the Masons in England and its dependencies. No country in the world, as far as I know, has escaped this. I forget which U.S. president it was that said that there is an interlocked group of people that are so pervasive everybody's afraid of them. I think this is what he was alluding to, this network of Freemasons which controls the world, which I think qualifies it, at least in part, as the woman riding the beast in Revelation, because of this controlling the governments of the world. In this country, the father of our country was a Freemason. The cornerstone of our capital at Washington was laid by George Washington with Masonic ceremonies. A large number of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were Freemasons. Masons have been prominent among our presidents. It's really exceptional to mention a president of the United States who has not been a Freemason. Masons are numerous among our legislators, justices, that were listening to the sermon that night, among men prominent in every walk of life, and no less among ministers than among those of other professions, so that its antiquity and its honorable character are assured. That is to say, its lock on all of the governments of the world is assured, and including seminaries and any institution of influence. That's why the world is in the condition it's in. That's why there's so much corruption, because as studies I recall from decades ago about Freemasonry from a former worshipful master that I saw there was an old show called the John Agerberg Show, but there was other sources besides that, who said that at the highest level, you must be willing to commit treason and murder in the name of Freemasonry. If your Freemason overlords tell you to commit murder or treason, you must do it. Your loyalty is to them, to your brotherhood, never to your government or the people. And this grew out of Theosophy and all the other ancient Hermetic and Kabbalistic false teachings. And he says here, Masonry is both operative and speculative. Speculative Masonry is modern. Operative Masonry is old. Operative Masonry, he says it must have existed in time past. I don't know exactly what he means by that. Speculative came into being when free education and opportunities for learning and culture were introduced into the world. Then it was no longer necessary for the secrets of a profession, like that of architecture, to be maintained by the profession because the books would tell it. In other words, you could get a general education and learn about how to build a brick wall or some other engineering thing or whatever. That's the free and open part of it. That's what they call speculative Masonry, education. Those who had up to that time maintained their guilds on the continent or their fellowships in Great Britain or numbers in Scotland together at this time came together and changed operative Masonry, or the actual building of temples, into speculative Masonry and adapted their degrees to the symbolic raising of the temple of human character, the elevation of man as God. Ever since that time, Masonry has been what we call speculative. It has its esoteric, its hidden side, its secret degrees, and it has its exoteric outer side, its public side, its outward form. This teaching anybody can learn who is interested in knowing it. The two esoteric and exoteric instructions taken together constitute what we know in our country as free and accepted Masonry. So there's the public face, the front, and then there's the heart, the evil, wicked heart at the center, which they hold to be good because they have exchanged darkness for light and light for darkness, as the Bible says. Woe to them who do this. And Satan masquerades as an angel of light. These two terms, free and accepted, are exceedingly interesting, not only to Masons, but to all others interested in Masonry. The order having originated in a time when slavery was prevalent, Masons, being men who were superior to other men in their knowledge, also in their position in life, were prominent in their communities from the very beginning. That no man who is a serf can belong to the order was the original expressed idea of the freedom of a Mason. This is the reason why, to a very limited extent, if at all, those of a color associated with serfdom, carefully spoken, have been admitted to Masonry. To a limited extent, this is why. It has been taught from the beginning that a man, to understand and exemplify its teachings, must be a free man. That's another thing borrowed from Freemasonry into Mormonism. They had a problem with this same issue. And you'll find, while Masonry has never been officially associated with political teaching or partisan discussion, Masonry, he says, they don't talk about these things. Still, men have been so influenced by its teachings of freedom, only for them. Masons were found in the ranks of the armies fighting that men should be free, and they are stealing the honor, stolen valor from Christianity, which it was the Christians, especially the women in America, who opposed slavery in the pre-Civil War era. It's Christianity in England that stood up against slavery, not the Freemasons. The term accepted referred originally to a man's position in the community. It meant primarily that he was accepted as an architect, that he was accepted because he knew enough to be accepted. In other words, he was a leader among men, that is to say, a business leader. Think of that, brother Masons. Your ancestors understood that a Mason in the community stood for something. He was more than an average man. In other words, this is a very ego-stroking thing, like I said before. And free, as opposed to those who are not, and there's been many sources that say that the lower Masons are deliberately deceived by the higher Masons, and that people who are deceived deserve it, just by the fact that they were able to be deceived. So the only real practitioners of these things are at the top. The people at the bottom are useful idiots to them. He goes on, to be a Mason was not only to be free among his brethren, but to be accepted. The standard of Freemasonry has always been high, and is expressed in nothing more than those old terms of the craft, free and accepted. So that's what they mean by it. And then he says, there's a title here called Masonry was cradled in Judaism. There's no doubt about it. It was not the outcome or product of Christianity, nor was it the offspring of Mohammedanism. It could not have been an outcome of paganism, because Masonry can never have a polytheist in its ranks. It has always been understood that a man to be free and accepted Mason must believe in one God. But that isn't the God of the Bible. They say polytheism corrupts people. Historically, Masonry was cradled in Judaism because Judaism, of all the religions of the world, has emphasized that one fundamental true idea of all the religions, that God is one. Fine. But inadvertently, they have supported the claim that the Bible did not evolve into monotheism. That's how it started. And they recognize this, but again, they're not talking about the God of the Bible. They're borrowing the idea of one God, but their God isn't the God of the Bible, it's Satan, the one who masquerades as an angel of light. They go on, it was cradled also in Judaism, we know, because everything in the teaching of its ancient degrees had to do with the temple that King Solomon erected on Mount Moriah's heights in the city of Jerusalem. That's why there are Knights Templar, and why they're so obsessed with Solomon and two pillars that they have named after two names in the Bible, and a lot of other things. Why are they, what's this thing with Solomon? They are Masons, remember, but they blended with this mysticism, and that's at the center of it. That's their symbolic center that puts both things together. All of the symbolic work rallies around that temple, and everything that is taught in the degrees of Masonry is taught in such a way that, first learning the facts of the temple, a man learns to construe those facts symbolically as to the rearing of the temple not made with hands, eternal in the heavens, which, again, they don't mean what we think they mean by those words. The temple not of a perfect stone building, but the temple of a perfect human character. This is where they define it. They don't mean Jesus. They mean themselves as perfect human beings. They believe they are temples because they're Masons. But though Masonry was nourished in Judaism, Masonry adapted itself to whatever was believed to be a fuller revelation of Almighty God in the Newer Testament, and also Masonry, not changing any whit of the old teachings, has accommodated itself to Christian teachings, having named two eminent saints of the early Christian church, each named John, in the dedication of its lodges. I don't care if they took names from both testaments. That doesn't mean they honor God's word. And has placed its Bible with its two testaments upon its altar. Masonry teaches the fundamental doctrines of Christianity. No, it doesn't. Which are also the fundamental doctrines of Judaism. No. But they say it's just believing God and immortality. Those are not just the foundations, I would say. Two foundations. There is one foundation. That's God. God is immortal. Human souls are immortal. But the foundation is Jesus. The whole Bible points to him. Masonry, though cradled in Judaism, has been nourished among Christians to such an extent, this is infiltration, that as far back as we can find anything of Masonry, we find Masonry prominent and eminent among Christian men. This is why we have corrupt seminaries, which turn out corrupt pastors. And then they say that our next postulate is that Freemasonry, ancient and honorable and accepted, etc., etc., teaches the truth. No, it doesn't. It teaches an absolute bald-faced lie. But we lasted a long time, he's arguing, therefore it must be true. No, lies have lasted since the Garden of Eden. You will be as gods, and as God really said. That's an ancient lie. Ancientness does not equate to truth. And he says, Masonry doesn't teach the whole truth, but everything it does teach is true. That's a lie. It claims fear God, but it doesn't mean what you mean by it, or the Bible means by it. Anyway, they're describing here some things about what you see when you enter a lodge. And they say you see the symbol of God. Probably not. Masonry teaches above all things else, the fatherhood of God. And again, that's something that every false religion has an idea of. It teaches that God made all things, duh, and God loves every man. Well, that's in some religions, not other, but it's actually only Christianity that says this and demonstrates it through Jesus. And it is true that there's the separation between God and peoples because people turned away. That's true. But again, a mixture of truth and error is the best way to get error, to people. It teaches the loving kindness and continual care, protection of God. All its symbolism proclaims its truth. No, it does not. Through the work of the various degrees, every man must learn the lesson that God is and God is good. Well, you don't need Freemasonry for that. You need the Bible for that. Anyway, you can go on and on and on in here. I do want to move on. I want to show you a couple of other things. First of all, there's another link I have in the description about Freemasonry. That would be this one from The Guardian. And it's, again, it says, secret Freemasons should have no place in public life. Don't be distracted by the handshakes and funny aprons. We should be holding Masons to account. I totally agree. It seems almost retro to be talking about Freemasons again, but after two alarming reports, there's light in their darkness again. And let me go back and see the date here, 2018. First, over the new year, there was an allegation from retiring Police Federation Chair Steve White that Freemasonry was blocking reform from within the force, preventing women and black officers progressing professionally. This still goes on. And this weekend I saw a report that 2 lodges set up to recruit at the Palace of Westminster are continuing to operate, one established for members of Parliament and staff in the Commons and Lords, and a second for political journalists. They've got, if you want to know why the media are the way they are, this is why. Many regard Freemasonry as an 18th century boys' club. That's a good description. All funny aprons and committee handshakes on the surface. That's good for the Masons themselves, but it's our mistake. The most senior figures are listed, but surely that's a sop, I guess. I don't know exactly what they mean, because all the while, the vast majority of lay members of the Brotherhood remain anonymous. What's the problem, they'll ask you, but don't be fooled. No one joins the Masons for the handshakes. It must be for the benefits it can bring, and the benefits are at the very least what they just mentioned, which are political, and in their businesses and so forth, their communities. From the outside, we can't be entirely sure what those benefits are. In the past, criminals have been found to be in the same lodges as investigating police officers. Brian Paddock, the former Liberal Democrat mayoral candidate and one-time commander at Scotland Yard, tells in his autobiography how one officer, a Mason, changed both his behavior and body language on becoming aware of Paddock's membership, an attitude he saw replicated by other Masons when he revealed his links. The guilt, he says, led him to stop attending lodge meetings. That is to say, they were all well and good, all fine with arresting criminals until they learned they're Masons. And then they get off the hook. It's all above board, little more than a social club, defenders tell you, a place to know more about yourself and become a better individual, or as they call it, a peculiar system of morality, veiled in allegory and illustrated with symbols. But if that's all harmlessly true, why the defensiveness? On learning of my intention to write an article, a senior council official phoned to berate me for making a fuss over nothing, claiming Freemasonry was just a way for men to let off steam. With blood oath. When I asked why membership remains secret, he cited tradition. When I asked how many of his senior council colleagues were also Masons, he paused and hung up. Need to know, I suppose. One can try to understand perhaps the thrill of being part of an invisible network and recipient of wordless acknowledgement, but it's also important to understand that this is how power is perpetuated. Equality legislation, audits on gender pay gaps, ethnicity and disability within companies and public authorities all aim to stamp out the informal transfer of power through social networks in favor of appointment through genuine merit. But how can that happen if favors are dispensed behind closed doors? Or even when there is the lingering belief that these unseen processes give people we cannot identify an advantage. That's the whole point. And I've said before, if you know somebody's name, you don't know who's really behind things. It certainly can't happen when only specific groups can benefit. The council official who knew very well I wasn't a Mason. Being both female and Catholic, I'm not making any excuse for Catholicism, but there's a larger point here. My entry would be unlikely. While a small handful of lodges outside the main organization now admit women, my Catholicism would also be seen by most as pretty much incompatible. Why is that when all of that other stuff we read about being in that sermon was about how compatible they are with Christianity? Now, I'm not equating the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, as Christian necessarily. There are Christians within it. Their teachings are not, because they add to salvation by faith. Anyway, this is the Christianity most people see. This is the one that most haters of Christianity equate with it. That's not true, it's not fair, but that's what they think, and this is the same impression I get from the Freemasonry sermon we just read. It is, of course, questionable in a free society whether it's right to dictate to individuals with whom they can associate, saying who can you associate with. Some association with criminal intent is proscribed by law and punishable by courts, but in all other cases, people are free to choose. That said, it's well within the rights of society to shape the nature of the decisions people freely make. If Freemasons won't be completely open about their membership, should we not say that in all cases membership is incompatible with public service? Asking public servants to either confirm they're not a member of a Masonic organization or to be open when they are won't fully excise the backroom deals or the stench of privilege. The police have attempted for many years to impose such a stricture with apparently limited effect. Still, it would signal intent. That is to say, they think the police had tried to resist this, but we know they have their fraternities as well. The Brotherhood hardly seems in fine metal. It is said that membership has fallen by 150,000 in the last 20 years, but we can't know that for sure. Indeed, when the Masons talk about transparency and good spiritists, we're talking a great deal on trust, taking a great deal on trust about the elements in public view without any ability to see what lies beneath the surface. That has not gone away. It has gotten stronger, as we saw back in 2020 when a certain worldwide event happened and everyone down to the local level marched in lockstep. This is how that happens with an underground network that has not been honest at all about anything. And we have ample reason to be suspicious going on here. Chumminess, social connection, camaraderie, all of these are in good supply at sports and dining clubs with doors on the high street and windows that peer out onto the 21st century. Masons tell me this: if you truly huddle in secret to no malign end, and with no professed benefit unavailable elsewhere, what's the point? You could join a sports club. So, anyway, that's their expose of Freemasonry back in 2018. Now I'm going to look very briefly at an article. There's a couple of articles on Helena Blavatsky, who we've met briefly a little bit ago. A seeker of truth and a fraud. Okay? So, the Godmother of the New Age movement confounded modern Theosophy that combined mystical and magical beliefs. So that's just where New Age comes from. So if somebody is saying things that sound awfully familiar, New Age is a fine term to use. They don't like the term, but that's what it is. But you can call it Theosophy and be a little more precise. She was an intellectual adventurer, occultist, and fraud. Madam, as she was often called, was co-founder, esoteric late 19th century movement, what we've already learned about. Given its central role in bringing Asian religious traditions to Western cultures, she became known as the Godmother of the New Age movement. New Age and the hippies and all that. Madame Blavatsky relates to the New Age movement today because she challenged the established order of Christianity. There it is in black and white that she was anti-Christian from the start. That was her motivation in bringing this stuff to the Western world, not because she thought it was just so awesome, but because she wanted to replace Christianity. Nobody tries to replace Buddhism or Hinduism or even Mormonism. They want to replace, quote unquote, mainstream Christianity. It's an essential feature of the New Age that it's always in opposition. It's always somehow anti-establishment. And here it wasn't just the establishment, because we've seen the hippies grow up to become tyrants. It was talking the whole time about Christianity when it said establishment, even if most of the hippies didn't know that. She became a model for the Build Your Own Religion school. This was something Blavatsky translated into action. They talk about how she was born in Russia in 1831, traveled the world, and then she met this guy, and said, connected through time and space to ancient sages. So she was a spiritist, doing things absolutely the Bible said not to do, and that should come as no surprise. There was a booming late interest in the occult in the late 19th century, and Americans and Europeans flocked to mediums and spiritualists to connect with their dead loved ones. Forbidden by Christianity. This religion allowed them to do that, and they quickly jumped ship. A lot of people did. The interest in seances was part of a broader Victorian cultural shift when European and American Christians began doubting biblical accounts of the creation of the world. Anybody, I guess is why, I say, anybody who is trying to throw doubt on the Bible is supporting this anti-biblical New Age Theosophical movement. Emerging scientific evidence was putting pressure on scriptural literalism, because scientific evidence isn't what it purports to be either, and the received creation story, hence evolution. This stuff is all tied together. People were looking for something new and different, a way to make sense of a rapidly changing world. And dare I say again, Mandela effect is part and parcel of that. In 1870, Blavatsky was in New York, and taking advantage of this shift, firmly embedded herself in the seance circuit. She was a natural, and her seances became extremely popular. 5 years later, the charismatic but still mysterious Blavatsky established the Theosophical Society in New York, And by 1880, successful but controversial and divisive, she moved to India, where she established the international headquarters, gathered followers, but her reputation as a spiritualist and possessor of wisdom came to a halt in 1885. After embarking on an investigation of Blavatsky and motivated by stories of her sensational seances, replete with spiritual visions and smashed dishes that would miraculously reconstruct, the Society for Psychical Research in Cambridge declared her a fraud. For our part, quoting them, we regard her as neither the mouthpiece of hidden seers nor as a mere vulgar adventuress. We think that she has achieved a title to permanent remembrance as one of the most accomplished, ingenious, and interesting impostors in history. Despite being labeled a fraud, Blavatsky's influence remained, and her imprint on what later became the New Age movement is undeniable. Her thinking influenced a range of artists from Gustav Mahler to Vasily Kandinsky to Lauren Harris. Is there a solution to the enigma of Madame Blavatsky? Ideas contributor, whatever his name is, Roy, suggests that whether or not one believes in any of her stories, she does offer a chance to speculate, challenge assumptions and beliefs in what is possible. That's fine. Challenging claims is fine, and assumptions is fine. And expanding what you think might be possible is fine. But those are qualities anybody can have, and to use those as an excuse to overlook the fraudulent activities of Blavatsky is not fine. She adds that perhaps that is the legacy she left behind. Madame Blavatsky does not give us the answers, she gives us the questions. And that's true of everybody who says you can seek truth but not find it. That's what they're saying, the same thing as her. And just real briefly, one more article in here about Blavatsky. You can read her history in New World Encyclopedia, her wandering years, etc., etc. And just briefly, her final years. In August 1890, she formed the inner circle of 12 disciples. Gosh, why did she pick that? And named all these people, mostly women, suffering from heart disease, rheumatism, Bright's disease of the kidneys, and complications from influenza. Madame Blavatsky died at 19 Avenue Road in England on May 8th, 1891. Her last words were, "Keep the link unbroken, do not let my last incarnation be a failure." So here we have karma, incarnation, Hinduism, no surprise. This is why I don't use the word karma. It's frequently used. It's become a generic term people use for people getting what they deserve. But of course, it's only used against other people that we don't like. I don't use that term. I don't like that term. I don't believe in karma. So I just say reaping and sowing. Her body was cremated. 1/3 of her ashes were sent to Europe, 1/3 to the United States, and 1/3 to India. And they celebrate May 8th as White Lotus Day for her. She was succeeded as head of one branch of the Theosophical Society by her protege, Annie Besant. I know that name too. Her friend W.Q. Judge headed the American section. The split was caused by accusations that Judge had also fabricated messages from the masters. How easy would that be to do? I'm going to go into a secret room and get messages and come out and give them to you. You can make up anything you want. And that's exactly what Muhammad did too. He would go into a cave and come out looking all weird, and they would, some guy would write down what he said. And if somebody complained about something he taught, he would go into the cave and get an update and change his teachings and come out, and everybody was cool with that. Criticisms. Much of Blavatsky's writing contains strong racial themes. She regularly contrasts Aryan with Semitic culture to the detriment of the latter, asserting that Semitic peoples are an offshoot of Aryans who have become degenerate in spirituality and perfected in materiality. That seems awfully familiar today. People everywhere are against them. And I think you can figure out who she's talking about. Semitic peoples, not all Semitic peoples, but certain of them. Blavatsky also sorted the races of the world by their relation to the fifth race, the Atlanteans, putting the Aryans on the top and describing Aborigines, native Australians and Tasmanians, as semi-animal creatures. It's the same for the founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger. Her work influenced dare I say, Nazi ideology, got to be careful what you say on YouTube especially, has brought their philosophy, science has brought hoots of derision from those who hold to the Cartesian model. In place of psychology, there was an occult frap composed of the mysticism of one guy, the Theosophy of Blavatsky, and the archetypes of Nordic mythology. Don't tell me this is not a religion. On the other hand, recognition of the universal brotherhood and sisterhood of humanity, regardless of race, gender, or color, was a basic goal of the Theosophical Society. So they say. But look at their founder. The Society for Psychical Research, as part of their ongoing scientific attempts to study and document evidence of the supernatural realm, sent a researcher to investigate Blavatsky's claim to mediumistic tendencies. That researcher's report, issued by the SPRs, concluded that Blavatsky has achieved a title to permanent remembrance as one of the most accomplished and interesting imposters in history. It should also be noted that SPR scientists were quite open and candid about the cases they were unable to debunk, and therefore classified as true paranormal occurrences. So it isn't as though these people were absolutely against anything paranormal or supernatural. Plagiarism, in this quote here, is a marked characteristic of the writings of Blavatsky and the Mahatmas of India. They stole their stuff. In Isis Unveiled, I have traced some 2,000 passages copied from other books without credit. Her secret doctrine is permeated with similar plagiarisms. So if we see anybody extolling the virtues of Blavatsky, show them this. The Voice of the Silence, claimed to be a translation by her of a Tibetan work, is a compilation from various Buddhistic and Brahmanical works from Buddha and Brahma, a wholesale plagiarism. The Book of Daisen, another bogus translation of an alleged ancient work, is also a compilation from various uncredited sources, all of them 19th century books. Response to critics. A modern researcher, Harrison, also a member of the Society for Psychical Research, has revealed a report and calls it thoroughly bad, and that the SPs are merely rubber-stamped what Hodgson wrote. So there's just one lone voice against it, okay? It was also the case that Blavatsky was not writing as an academically trained scholar, so they're making excuses for her not being an academic for what she wrote. But everybody knows plagiarism is wrong. She was not trained in academic protocol. That's, again, not an excuse. She wrote as an amateur, albeit one with a great deal of knowledge. She drew on a multitude of sources. You got to cite your sources. Everybody knows that. Right or wrong, it is not uncommon for writers with such a background to ignore some of the conventions. She wasn't ignoring conventions. She was outright blatantly stealing. And then there's Manly P. Hall. If we're talking about Theosophy and Freemasonry and stuff like that, we got to talk about this guy. We have two more after this. Sorry, this is going a little long. Manly Palmer Hall. I've seen people today extolling the virtues of this person. Mystic, eclectic philosopher, and founder of the Philosophical Research Society, a modern equivalent of the School of Pythagoras. He was the 20th century's most prolific writer on mysticism, magic, and ancient philosophies. He authored 200 books, 8,000 lectures, best known for his 1928 work, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. Sounds exactly like Blavatsky. He published his magnum opus, An Introduction to Ancient Symbols and Secret Traditions, at the age of 27, to immediate acclaim. The most prominent early 20th century American occult revival is central to that. He was born in Ontario. Father was a dentist, mother was a chiropractor. They separated while his mother was still pregnant with him. He was raised by his maternal grandmother. She moved them to South Dakota. He was sick a lot, but read a lot on his own. And his grandmother tried to get him some education. And she died when he was 16, and he went to California to be with his mother. His career as a mystic sage began in 1919. All of this stuff happened about the same time. When he came to California to be reunited with his mother, he came under the influence of self-styled followers of Rosicrucianism. Remember that? Where that came from? In California, he lived at the Rosicrucian Fellowship and founded by Max Heindel, but grew suspicious of the order's claims to ancient wisdom. Moved to Los Angeles, Fell in with the metaphysical seekers and discussion groups. One day he was attracted by a sign advertising phrenology, the discipline that reads human psychology through the shape and contours of the skull, of all the things to be intrigued by. The proprietor became his guru and explained magnetism, reincarnation, the aura, the wisdom of the ancients, the mysteries of India and the East, and the secret teachings of the church. Secret teachings of the church? Not the Bible. To Hall, who proved to be an excellent student with a photographic memory and a talent for speaking. 1 year later, he invited him to speak to a room, and he was a success. Part showman, part shaman, Hall wore a dark tailored suit and sat mid-stage, his hands resting palms down on the arms of a baronial chair that was bathed in light, so he wanted to present himself as mystical from the start. He spoke for 1.5 hours, not a minute longer. Whether his subject was Egyptian initiation ceremonies or mythic water sprites, he concluded abruptly with the same sign-off, "Well, that's about all for today, folks." Always an hour and a half. He was influenced by theosophical teachings. Apart from a short spell in a military school, he was without formal education. In California, he came under the influence of the Theosophical Society, began his public career in 1920 in Santa Monica, gave lectures, became a lifelong admirer of H.P. Blavatsky and her secret doctrine. So he was a key devotee of hers, a child of hers, spiritually speaking. And there are people today saying what a great guy he was. People in otherwise so-called conspiratorial realms pushing this guy. Manly Hall was never a member of that society and possibly never a member of any society, theosophical. Nonetheless, he was heavily engaged with the TSA and lectured at the Besant Hollywood Lodge, San Francisco. So he said her works were unique, remarkable, and valuable, that many of the remarks she made during her time were highly controversial, are now generally accepted, and that many of the findings which she reported and which amazed her contemporaries now belong to our common knowledge. So he was praising her up and down. Let's see, the next editor of her works after World War II worked with Hall to make Philosophical Research Society 5th volume, etc., etc. Teachings of all ages. Hall's world travels gave him some degree of proximity to the monuments and philosophies of antiquity. But the materials that finally made it possible for him to complete his Book of Wisdom were those he discovered in the great Western libraries just opening to widespread public use. Hall gained access to some of the rarest manuscripts at the British Museum, and he found material in the vast Beaux Arts reading room of the New York Public Library. He amassed a bibliography of nearly 1,000 entries. By 1928, he published what would become known as the Big Book, has never gone out of print. The Secret Teachings of All Ages, funded by a bevy of wealthy supporters, was published to immediate acclaim. That doesn't happen by accident. Remember the network. Hall published other books widely considered classics of occult literature, but this one stood above the rest. Remains influential, and many of his teachings and ideas presented to the public remain in circulation. Illustrated, the instant success catapulted Hall into national spotlight. But I wanted to see where they talk about Freemasonry, and it isn't until the end credits on this article, The Lost Keys of Freemasonry. So there's that connection. He is promoted by Freemasons, just to make that clear. And in the interest of getting through all these links in a reasonable amount of time, there's more Freemason information, and look whose picture's at the top here, Manly P. Hall. So you can read about that. Now I want to go quickly on to the last two occultists, one of these being Emanuel Swedenborg. This is of the same ilk. The life-giving guiding principles provided by 18th century mystic and spiritual explorer Emanuel Swedenborg have inspired some of the world's greatest minds and souls. Helen Keller, D.T. Suzuki, and Ralph Waldo Emerson, to name a few, as well as countless members of everyday people searching for truth. So, red flags already, but you can read about what his teachings were. They were very mystical, esoteric, the same as all the others that we've been reading about. This is not a Christian leader or theologian. So if someone is following Swedenborg, Don't mistake them for being a Christian. And he said, it says he studied all sorts of things from astronomy to mechanical engineering to anatomy, got into the spiritual world, and basically twisted the Bible in the hopes of bringing a message of hope that the Bible already had. This is a website favorable to him, telling you all about him. So whatever you're reading here is not somebody trying to misrepresent him. But anyway, this is another blending of science, so-called, and mysticism, and trying to weave the Bible into that and make it sound Christian, just the way Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses try to do today. So look into that. And also we have someone called Rudolf Steiner. And this is rudolfsteiner.org, another website favorable to him. And it says, scientist of mind and spirit, dealing with second sight, which revealed worlds to him that others did not perceive. So if somebody's telling you that they're seeing other worlds, they've likely heard of this guy Steiner. And he was born in Europe, etc., etc. But again, you can look into this seeing other worlds thing, an esoteric hidden teacher. This was not someone who's going to teach you the truth that's out in the open that you'll find in the Bible. So please read these articles. This video is getting very long already. And see for yourself what these people are teaching, and remember these names and how influential they were on all of what's happening in the world today, especially in the Western world, where Christianity had influence in the past, but this is now being quickly overrun. As the Bible says, there are fake apostles, fraudulent workers, passing themselves off as apostles of Christ, because Satan presents as an angel of light, so his servants also present themselves as servants of righteousness. Don't be fooled by them. I've given you mainly the foundation here and given you some names, some websites to look at quickly, but just to be aware of who they are, where these teachings come from, and if you hear these terms, you know the taproot of all of it. And again, it goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden, to Gnosticism, to you will be as gods, and you are being held back by the God of the Bible. That's the root of their teaching, the root of their hatred of Christianity only, and it explains a lot of things that's going on in our world today. So I encourage you to pursue the links in the description, read for yourself, and be a good Berean, and as the Bible says, and discerning, which you use the Bible for as your standard of truth. Thanks for watching.